Hey everyone, it's Kelly from Silly Moon Quilting Co. Today I'm going to show you Judy and Heather, and we're going to quilt the perimeter or the ditches of the blocks that make up this log cabin. I have a quilting plan in mind, but for this video I'm just going to show you how easy quilting in the ditch around a square block is with these rulers. So we're going to start with Judy, the smaller of the two, and you can see here I've got my quilting block here, and I kind of am going to plan this a little bit because I want to quilt this as one block, and then I want to quilt this around here as one block. So I have to find a spot where I'm going to be able to travel and it's going to be seen the least. So I'm going to start in this corner, and then I'm going to stitch up, or sorry, stitch over and then up, and then over and then back down. And that will leave me there. That way I can travel in my ditch to here, and then I can go over here, and then I can do the next size square. So I'm going to start by lining up Judy like this. I'm going to bring my thread into the corner there. I'm going to pull up my thread, holding that in the back. Holding that thread, pulling up that top thread. If you do this, or bottom thread rather, if you can't get it because you got crazy nails on, Christmas nails, and give that a pull, hold on to that, and take a couple locking stitches to make sure you're locked. And I'm using a bright teal thread here, so you'll see that as we go along. I'm going to switch back to my gloves again. Really didn't need to take them off, I guess, but so to use Judy here, you can see we've got lots of registration lines on this ruler. So what I want to do is I want to make sure that I'm square, so I go along here nice and square. So I've got registration lines going this way, and I've got registration lines going this way. So if my block is square, which I am going to assume it is, I can line up this on this block going this way, and I can line up this one on this block going this way. Now, what's interesting to note, and I'm just going to turn this so you can see this a little better, is you'll see there's two extra lines here. All of these lines on Judy are 1/4 inch apart, as all of our lines are. They've been engraved 1/4 inch apart. But you'll see these two are actually 1/2 inch away. And the reason for that is we wanted to distinguish them so that you would know, put that on darker so it's a little easier to see, so you will know where your needle will end up. So your needle will end up right about there. So where those two lines, if you extrapolate them, they end, that's where you're going to end up with your needle. So let's go back to where we were, get all lined up. So I'm up against the end of my ruler foot. I've got my sticky tape on the ruler, which comes in all the packages. And I want to make sure that this line here is pretty much in line with that spot where I'm going to stop. And the reason for that is I'm going to do all of this in one motion. So I don't have to turn my ruler and I don't have to turn my quilt. So I'm going to hold that and I'm going to start stitching. And you can go at whatever pace you feel is good, you're comfortable with. Go slow when you're starting. You'll get faster as you go along. And when you do this, you want to make sure you end up nice in that corner. So I'm just going to shift the ruler and take another stitch because I want to make sure I'm well lined up in that ruler. Then I'm going to double check that I'm lined up this way and this way using the marking lines on my ruler and the lines that are on my quilt. I'm going to hold this, hold everything, and I'm slowly moving it back the other direction. And I'm going to stop when I get to that corner again. So we've done half of the block already, and we haven't had to move our ruler. And that's the beauty of this L shape. Now, obviously, the bigger you get as far as block, you'll either have to move up to the Heather ruler, or you may need to shift it. But for smaller blocks, this works great. So then I'm just going to pull my ruler around this way. And I'm going to first check to make sure that this line here, the one that's half an inch away from the others, is roughly in line with this. And in this case, it works out quite well because I've actually got a seam there. So I can line that up on that seam, and that will put my needle right there. And then the same with this one, should be there. So I've got a couple extra checks here to make sure that I'm nice and square because we want to make sure we stay in our ditch. I've got that lined up on that seam. I can look here, and even though, I'm going to move to the back here, even though you'll see here that I'm not on the seam, my distance between the line and the seam is going to stay constant. And this has got to do with my piecing. So here we go. So I make sure that I'm nice and square, and same on this side, lined up. I'm going to hold my ruler. I'm holding my fabric taut, not tight, and I'm going to stitch back the other direction. And make sure you get nice in that corner because that will make your ditch nice and square. So I don't have to, where if I was using edgy 6 or a straight edge, I would have to turn my ruler and make sure I'm all lined up again, but I don't have to do that. I can just go ahead and carry on with Judy exactly the same way I did there. And I'm going to stop there. So I can move my ruler, and now I want to do this next block here. Okay, so I need to stitch in my ditch there. So I can use my Judy ruler again for that, and I can use this line to make sure I'm lined up, and again another one going this way. So we've got lots of lines on here to make sure that we stay nice and square, and that just makes things a little bit easier. I'm going to stop right there, and now I want to stitch all the way around. Turn this so you can see. I want to stitch all the way around this block now. Okay, and I'm going to go back to where I was because I want to show you that you can do this whole thing without turning your quilt, which is super important if you're working on a domestic machine. So now we can see here that Judy's a little bit short for this if I wanted to do the whole thing, which is totally fine. So I'm going to do it kind of half and half. So I started part way through that seam. So I'm going to line up this way again on this seam over here. Sorry. I'm going to line up on this seam here. And I'm going to line up this way so I know that I'm nice and square. And then I'm going to continue stitching in my ditch. Again, I didn't quite make my corner because I was too close, so I'm going to take a stitch over. I want to end up nice in that corner, nice and sharp in that corner where those blocks meet. It just kind of makes it a little bit neater. So there I stopped, but you can see that that's not the end of that square block. I need to keep stitching all the way over to here. So where I ended here, all I need to do is shift my ruler along and use my next point of reference in my log cabin block to make sure that I'm square to continue stitching around that block. I'm going to stop nice and square in that corner. And again, I could just pull my ruler this way and continue stitching back that way. Just pull it tight so that it's tight in the corner. I'm lined up here, and then I can continue stitching back the other way. You want to make sure you're holding your fabric taut, not tight. You don't want to pull it. And make sure you're paying attention to where you're getting to the end of your ruler. And then I can just shift it up. And you can see I've got another, my line here is following along, so I can use it on either side. And I'm going to keep stitching up. Stopping when you need to move your hands to make sure that you've got a good grip, because you don't want to lose your grip. And I kind of find that if I come to an intersection, I'll stop, take a look at what I'm doing, and then I can slide that back up again. Kind of keeps me nice and square, make sure that I'm staying in that ditch. So now I've done 2 of the 4 sides. And I'm going to show you what it would look like if I used heather for this instead, because heather's the similar style, but it's a little bit bigger. So I'm going to bring it in behind my ruler foot, and I'm going to line it up the same way I did. So I put my ruler in that little indent there. You can see I'm still going to be short. So if I want, I can use this side of heather. Now I've got the clearance to do this all in one go. Bring that up a bit so you can see a little better. I have the clearance now to do this all in one go. And I can use the same registration lines to make sure that I'm nice and square. I'm going to stop, just adjust my hands so that I've got a good, make sure you're holding the fabric nice and taut. Move my hands again. And by using the outside of the heather, I can stitch right to that corner. So I'm using the long edge of heather on this one because you can see I've got just enough room there that's going to allow me to stitch that all in one go. So I'm using the long lines, or the engraved lines on here, to line up with my seam going that way and my seam going that way to make sure that I'm nice and square. Remembering, of course, this is dependent on whether your piecing is square. So if you're unsure, you can just take a dude and do a little measure down there and make sure that you're at a 1/4 inch. So you're going to hold your ruler nice and flat. You're going to hold your quilt top nice and taut, and just keep stitching in that ditch. And again, you can go as fast or as slow as you want. When you're stitching in the ditch, go nice and slow. I always go a little bit slower, just because it's really obvious if you jump out of that ditch, especially if you're using a high contrast thread. So I'd rather go a little bit slower and make it nice and neat. I'm going to stop when I get to that corner, and I have to stitch back to this point because we came up here. Turn that so you can see it. We came up here, and I started my stitching around that block here. So I'm going to stitch there and back because I want to stitch up this part here. So I'm going to line up with seam on there, make sure I'm nice and square. Just go my ditch over there. And then stitch back. And then I'm going to stop there. And I'm going to continue on up here and then go around the outside block exactly the same way I did that one. So I'm going to hold my ruler. I'm going to make sure I'm all lined up here and here. I'm going to stitch down that ditch, making sure I get right into that corner. And then I'm going to turn my ruler and carry on along this way. So you have a couple options here, and if you can see here, I've got the ruler hanging out off of the edge of the quilt. So I think in this case what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to turn it around and put it in behind here. I've got a line registration mark. It gives me a little bit more grip on the quilt to make sure that I stay nice and square, and I don't have to worry about the sticky tape coming in contact with my sew slip mat, because that can cause some damage. So I'm just going to hold that there, take one more stitch to make sure I'm nice and square in my ditch, and then I'm going to carry on stitching around that block. So I'm just going to slide heather along. I'm only going to go that far so I can make sure I'm square and lined up there. I've still got this line in behind my ruler foot here to make sure that I'm staying nice and square. And I'm going to stitch right into that corner nicely. And then go back up the other way. So I'm not going to talk through the rest of this part. I'm just going to let you see what I did here. So you can see here I'm using this side of Heather, and I'm lucky enough to have big throat size here, so I can put this side on here, or put it all the way through. If you don't have that room, you can absolutely turn this and go on the other side. It just doesn't quite give you as many lines to line up, but theoretically you'll be doing this on a larger quilt. So then you've got more registration lines from the block beside the one that you're working on. Okay, the other option, of course, is to switch to the smaller of the L's and use Judy, and then just shift it more. But I like to be able to get in a bit of a rhythm and have that nice longer stitch line. And then I've still got the registration lines to make sure that I'm staying nice and square and lined up, going around my log cabin. So there we go. We finished stitching this in the ditch, and I think it looks pretty good. So to do this, we used our two newest rulers, Judy and Heather. Turn that around so you can see both of them. Judy and Heather to stitch around, and you can use either of these on your domestic or long arm, and they come in either 1/8 or 1/4 thickness. So either one will work for you. If you're not sure what thickness you need, go ahead and check out the video on our YouTube channel showing you what thickness works for you by using 4/4. Thanks everybody, and have an amazing day.